my dad did very well for the stockholders in that first bank that he started. He did very well with the stockholders. He could brag about that. But despite the fact that he did do so well by them, as would be indicated by the amount of interest that he paid on their deposits, that's what it means by doing well by them. They didn't like the way he did business for himself outside the bank somehow or other. I don't know exactly just how that was or what was in their minds, but what he did with his own money in making money for himself outside the bank is something I just don't know about. But that's the way it was. With his own money, he one way he used it was to buy stock in every little outfit that wanted to establish in Hobart. For instance, there was a whip factory. I think he bought some stock in that.
You know, that was kind of a self-serving thing, because if he's helping new businesses come in, then that would eventually lead to the fact that it would help the bank, because they would be getting loans and so forth.
Yes, sure. He figured that it wasn't purely selfish. That it wasn't exclusively an idea of his to make himself rich at all. It was something that would have meant more business for the town. Well, as I was saying, there was a whip factory that was started up in our portion of the town, and there was oh, I don't think right now. A ball bearing factory. He got acquainted with with somebody else that had an idea for a ball bearing that they thought would be better than the Timken bearing. And I guess the two of them worked together on it, and they actually got a small bearing factory started. And well, both those factories, the whip factory and the bearing factory, worked for a number of years, and then they both quit. And then I remember there was a factory in a town that was close by, made some product they shipped off on the railroad. I don't remember now just what that was, but I guess that failed later. And and then the Gary Steel Mill had been built by that time. And the Gary Steel Mill, naturally, it was a big mill, and it needed to hire a good many people to run it. And it was natural for people in Hobart to get jobs in the steel mill, and for people that already had jobs in the steel mill to live farther out from Gary, perhaps in Hobart. So it was still something that he might have earned income on from the investment, but it was something that obviously Hobart needed. Did I mention an interurban line?
Does Hobart still exist?
What's that?
What's the population of Hobart now?
What's that? Huh?
Sorry, never mind. Go ahead.
Well, this there was no electricity to power this line electrically, and so they equipped the cars with gasoline electric drive. That is, the prime source of energy was gasoline engines, and the engines drove the generators, electric generators, and the generators drove the electric motors. So the actual direct operation of those cars that took the workers back and forth between Hobart and the Gary Steel Mill was just like any other regular electric interurban line. And I don't know for what reason, but anyway, well, yes, I do too. I don't think there's any doubt, but that was before automobiles had their climax. When they started that line, there were perhaps quite a number of people that had bought automobiles, but at that particular time, nobody, or very few people, had the foresight to see that the automobile would simply take over, and the people that wanted to go any place would have an automobile to ride in rather than to ride on this interurban line. And that's what they did.
But you were going to talk about what happened with this first bank when your father was making...
Well, I'm telling you.
Okay.
That's it. And it wasn't long until there just wasn't enough business for the urban line to, interurban line to pay their way. And because all the workers were buying automobiles and taking themselves to the steel mills, going back and forth from Hobart to Gary. So he lost virtually a fortune on that, and that apparently galled the well, not the stockholders, but what do you call the people that, they are stockholders, but they have you put a particular name on the people that...
The board of directors?
Yeah, the directors will do and so they added all of his outside activities up and said he was nobody they wanted in their bank. And this, mind you, despite the fact that as long as he was managing the bank, they had to regard their income as a high rate of interest. They were well paid. They suffered no losses, but they threw him out regardless. Well, he got to organizing another bank immediately. And the first thing he had to do was to buy a building. And there was a corresponding building. The original bank was at the really right at the center of town, crossroad, right at the center of town. And he bought a building that was directly across this crossroad there, right on the other corner. well, of course, he had to get enough men together to put up the money that that setting up a new bank would need. And after he got that much money promised, why he bought this building right across the street from on the corner, and all the places of business at that time were way up on stairs. I never learned why it was that in order to get into any of those buildings in that town, you had to walk up 5 or 6 steps. But he thought that the business would be a lot better if you made the first floor of your building level with the sidewalk. People would be much more likely to go into your bank if you had it in a more accessible place. So what he did was to lower the floor about 5 or 6 feet, and he got it all fixed up in a much more modern fashion, and it went on from there. They did open a bank, but it was in a very out of the way place. But they started their business before this. Started their business even in this small out of the way place. And when the new bank was all finished, that is, the physical setup of the bank was completed, they had a fancy opening. They got 3 musicians from Chicago, which was only 30 miles off. See, there was a man with a violin, one with a harp, and one with a flute, I think, that did that kind of work. And they came out from Chicago and played their music right in the lobby of this new bank, and he bought cigars that they said were 50-cent cigars, handed them out to everybody, and it was a gala time for a day there. And then the business went on from there. And I guess they did a very good business. And my grandmother got her share with the others, and I suppose it was 250 acres. And when that happened, things were quite different with my grandparents. My granddad never had much money. He tried to run some kind of a business, generally a store. And as I've heard my mother tell it, he tried in different places around Silver Lake to run a store, and he never made much money out of it. And when my grandmother got the money, or the land, really what it constituted was so many farms. Well, although my granddad was a poor businessman, when he dealt with the money all the time, buying and selling, he seemed to do all right with the farms. He apparently knew how to take care of a farm and how a farm should be taken care of. And he made it his business then, after that, to look after these farms. He hired, he got people to do the farming on shares. And I think that that all worked out fairly well. Anyway, he had enough cash to build a nice new house, big place, just on the hill up above the town.
And that's where your mom grew up?
My mom, what?
Is that where your mom grew up?
Yes, that's where she was.
How many brothers and sisters?
Where she, no, wait a minute. No, not so fast. My mother, my grandfather, I used to ride with him. Now, in a story in which I'm involved, that's something that I would not want left out. How I used to ride out to one of those farms every day when I was a kid and lived with them. I don't know how long it was. It was from, it was all winter. It was from the time, I guess, school started one year, all winter long, and it must have been all one summer. Anyway, it was quite a while that I lived with my grandparents, and I loved it. And my granddad had a horse and a wagon that we rode in. It was called a spring wagon, but there was no spring in it at all. They just called it a spring wagon.
Maybe they were talking about the fact that they used it in spring.
And he hitched up the horse every morning, and we went out to the farm. And to me, that was just heaven to ride in that wagon. Those 4 miles out to the farm. I'll never forget it. That was great.
Do you think that's what...
Oh, well, you asked if that's where my mother grew up. Well, I remember my granddad, as I told you, there were several different farms, and on one of the farms, he showed me the place where the log cabin stood, where my mother was born. Now, how long she lived there, I don't know, so I can't tell you where you say she grew up. I wouldn't know, but he did show me exactly where that cabin was when she was born. Log cabin. And my mother never lived in this big house. And if she lived in this log cabin I told you about that was right nearby where the big house was built, oh, I don't know about that. It may well be. I think during the time she grew up, she never lived in any place that was very fancy. But somehow or other, that whole family to which she belonged were very,
In a minute, okay.
very inclined towards education. They all wanted to get educated. And she started out being a teacher, and one of them went to New York and went to Columbia. No, I can't think of the name of it, but it was for it was a medical school that Columbia University had, and he graduated from that. And where the other uncle, McClure, graduated, in-law, I don't remember. But that's the way that was. They all leaned strongly towards education.
Shay, get down, please.
And my mother
Get down, please.
said that she never would marry a man that wasn't as educated
No,
as she was.
No.
But my dad had, there was no education for him because in his part of the country, as I remember it, they only conducted school up to the 4th grade. You got up to the point where you could do a little figuring and where you could read well enough. And that was all the education they had up to the 4th grade. And if I remember correctly, I remember that her mother, my grandmother, got that much education where she was. They just ran the school, the country schools, of course. The schools went up to the 4th grade, and that was enough. You could read and write, and what more do you need? And that's all people did need in those days, too, and that's a fact. They got along very nicely with that much education. So I don't know where you could say she grew up. Oh, I do remember that they went out to one of the Midwestern states. My grandparents did. There was quite an exodus out to that region. The government had set aside a certain large amount of land for people that wanted to go out and claim it. If they got there before somebody else, they could set claim on a given amount of land, and a lot of people did that. So they did that. Well, the rainfall in that part of the country is cyclic, and some years are very productive with a good rainfall, and then the cycle comes around to the point where the rainfall drops way down and production is not enough for people to make a living. Well, they'd heard how wonderful it was, but of course the claims they heard about were when there was plenty of rain. And they managed to get out there at just the time the rainfall was minimum. So after suffering a while, I don't suppose it was very long, they turned right around and came back to where they were. And I remember a token of that stay on their part out there. I don't know where it was, Nebraska or someplace out there. The token of that they had was a buffalo robe. Goodness, when I was a kid, I thought everybody had buffalo robes, and in the wintertime, we went to church in a sleigh, of course, and that's when I was staying with them. And we always had the buffalo robe to cover our knees with. And that kept us warm till we got to church, and then there were, there were stalls, you might say, a long row of stalls for people to keep their sleighs in and offer some protection to the horses. No, 30, I guess. Yeah, 1930. And the newcomers at Bell Labs took turns sitting at a special telephone, and the newcomers at AT&T building, that was half a mile down the street, the AT&T building, and the newcomers there sat at a corresponding special telephone, and each one of us could see a nice little picture of the man we were talking with. That we were talking with.
So they had video phones way back then.
Yes, way back then. Yes, it's very, very clear, just as clear as a photograph. Yeah, that was about 1930. Yeah, 65 years.
They're just not very popular nowadays because people feel like it's an invasion of privacy.
What?
Because they do have video phone technology. It's been around a long time. It's just not very popular because people consider it an invasion of privacy for people to, see them at any given time of day.
Yeah.
Well, for goodness sakes, anybody that didn't want it, all you'd have to do would be to switch it off. To carry an image that is completely natural and it's moving rapidly requires a carrier frequency of sufficiently great frequency in the carrier current. If you want to get a modulation of 5,000 hertz in a given line, you'd have to have a carrier frequency that's quite large compared with 5,000 hertz.
Well, that's a heck of a lot of hertz.
Well, they use them nowadays.
I don't know. Don't they think in terms of megahertz now?
Oh goodness, yes. Everything's
megahertz.
Everything is megahertz. Oh yes. James Clerk Maxwell published his famous equations of radiation. Helmholtz suggested to his assistant that he check it out. It was the most wonderful thing I thought that Maxwell did, was to write those equations right out of the clear air, to write up equations that had the tremendous meaning that those equations did, that he wrote. And I guess it was a while before anybody checked them out to see if they were really true. I suppose people that read the equations, the mathematicians, just had a feeling that, well, it's just very interesting, but what does it mean? Doesn't mean anything. I have an idea that's what people felt about it. And Helmholtz suggested to his assistant by the name of Hertz that he check it out. And Hertz did. That's how we still remember his name. He checked it out. Well, he set up what are called lecture wires to do it with. And he figured the lecture wires would be, if you'd transmit some radiation that you were supposed to have, why the electric wires would pick it up, and you could check on that by well, you would assume that, I don't know all the details of what he did and how he did it, but he did set up electric wires, and I suppose he figured that by spacing, well, by the proper spacing of the electric wires, this way and that he would get a radiation of a certain wavelength. So he set his cross pieces on the electric wires at that particular wavelength, whatever it was. And then if you had another set of what am I saying? Electric wires, you would transmit from one and expect to pick it up on the other set with the same spacing, and that would mean that it was tuned just like strings tuned for a musical pitch. The same idea exactly as a musical pitch. And if that worked, well, then that was proof of James Clerk Maxwell's theory. And that's what he did, and that's what happened. So that was a wonderful thing. I believe that Maxwell did. That was just a tremendous feat of the mind. I don't know of anything that should rate any higher than that. Just plain marvelous.
So how did you fit into the picture as far as what you did?
What?
How did your work at Bell Labs fit into this whole picture?
Oh, I don't remember what my immediate boss had something in mind he wanted to check out. I just don't remember what it was. But anyway, he wanted me to set up electric wires, and that's just exactly what Hertz did to check out what he was doing. Well, this fellow wanted something checked out. I forget what. Somebody published something. Seems to me it was some man that rated pretty highly in the anyway in the electric or not exactly the electric, but the telephony section of the Army, the section that has control or responsibility for communication. So that's the first job I had, electric wires. And I was working in a department that the head of which was the man that invented the first successful method of modulating a continuous electrical radiation by the voice. They tried since the early days in the turn of the century to modulate voice, but nobody had done a good job of it. And he was the one that invented the circuit by which voice could be successfully modulated. That meant that from now on you could speak over radio as clearly as over the telephone.
So, did that change radio?
Well, yes, you could say that it changed it. It made radio. The change is the same as enabling the telegraph operators on a railroad to all of a sudden be able to transmit any message anywhere they pleased by telephone. That's what it meant. Now, do you realize there was a day, maybe before you were born, when the people in the railroad stations, you know, there was always an operator then in the railroad station, and the operators transmitted their messages by the dot system, not by telephony at all.
When did radio come into use?
Well, the first transatlantic transmission, I believe, was conducted by Marconi. Now Marconi, I believe, gets a lot more credit than he really deserves. What he had was the backing of money, and that was a big thing, of course. Of course, he had to understand it well enough, but I don't believe he was a technical man at all. But I think it was 1903, the year of my birth, that he transmitted the first message across the Atlantic.
Hmm.
Things there on that table. We'll have to be careful about that.
Yeah, I know, but I just was trying to make more light on your clock so that she could get a picture of it. Get up there by your
There are various lights I can use here, thing, and it can be easily
I'm afraid camera's gonna hit something.
injured. It can be moved if we want it out of the way.
No, I think it's fine there, Grandpa.
Oh, all right.
The idea was to have you in the picture too.
We just wanted you to talk about it. Explain us.
Well, how much of that's the 8 millimeter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you really wouldn't need a movie camera to take a picture of it, would you? Except you can see the hands move up there. The second hand, particularly. I think maybe the best way to get a picture of it would be to take my stand. It's in the south room. Put the stand here and let it would, or back here, the stand would throw light on the whole thing. That would be a better way to...
Wait, Janine's talking to her.
I could explain the clock better just sitting down and talking about it. It's pretty hard to tell you what things are here. That the moving parts are so small, and you can't really see what goes on by looking at the clock. Now that's the truth. I'm not making that up at all. You just
Camera's
can't
like
see what
flying back and
goes
forth.
on. I could best just sit down and try to explain it to you. You see, the motions are extremely small. You measure those motions in terms of 32nd of an inch. They're very small motions. So I couldn't, I could do better just trying to explain it to you without referring to the clock. Yeah, it's not very easy to try to explain to anybody how it works. I don't know. I honestly can do better just telling you about it. That's the truth. Careful, careful. This is a pretty fragile thing.
What is it for?
Well, it's to shield the clock. I wanted to keep it at a constant temperature. And this closes on the clock with this pressed against the wall. And it makes a case for it so that I can maintain constant temperature. You can't tell how good a clock is unless you maintain constant temperature for it, or else have a clock that is perfectly compensated. But all precision clocks, such as the clocks that used to be used in observatories, are very carefully mounted and in cases that keep them from temperature change. Like this is insulating material that helps keep the temperature constant. That's the idea of this. I just haven't had time to work on it lately, that's all. Now, did you want to take a picture with this out of the way? Was that it? Yeah, I had quite a job cutting these pieces and cementing them all together. It was really something. My mother, something about her.
Yeah.
What was she like?
Oh my, well, that's quite a question. Well, they were married in '94. Well, if that isn't exactly the date, it can't be more than 6 months off either way. And somehow she got a job. She'd been teaching school. She graduated from high school. That's more than most kids did in those days, I guess. And then she said she wanted to be educated, and the way to get educated at that time was to attend the teacher's training school in Terre Haute, Indiana. That was a 2-year course. That was what you call education. And then just about that time, it was, I intended to speak of the so-called Columbian Exposition. It was supposed to be, naturally, let's see, Columbus discovered America, as they say. Ridiculous. Anyway, that was supposed to be 1892. That's the date, wasn't it? 92. Well, they didn't make it they didn't have this exposition ready to open up by 92, but it did open up in 93, I think, or 94. Anyway, she got in on it somehow. She got a job working for, gee, it was on the tip of my tongue then, Pullman. Got a job working for Pullman. Now, the Pullman sleepers were just grand, out of this world in those days. And her job was to be a hostess on one of these super grand Pullman cars. And one thing that became famous at this Columbian Exposition was the Ferris wheel. That was the most popular attraction they had. But I'll never forget her telling about a building of 5 or 6 stories right at the edge of the fairgrounds that had a fire. And the fire was burning vigorously, and there was a so-called sweatshop where they hired girls to run the sewing machines to make clothing. They worked up in one of the upper stories, and this building had no fire escapes. And when the fire got up to where these girls worked, why, there was no possible way of saving them. And she just had to watch those girls jump out the windows and kill themselves. And that's something that just, she never forgot that.
Well, what was her involvement?
What's that?
What was her involvement?
Oh, none at all. It was just that from where her time was spent in this Pullman car as a hostess. But from her, she could look right out the window, right across the fairgrounds, and see this building burning down with the girls jumping out the windows, jumping for 4 or 5 stories and killing themselves.
Wow. Sounds like Ireland. Like,
she never forgot that.
that's really sad. It sounds like Northern Ireland in, that's very sad. in the late 1800s
Yes.
too.
Yeah.
So, your mother grew up in Silver Lake,
Yes.
and at that time was your mother living in the big house, or did that happen later?
They were married in '94, and I think it was very soon after they were married that they came to Hobart. And the big house, if you want to call it that, was where my grandparents, what my grandparents built, just outside of the tiny town of Silver Lake. It was up on a hill, just a quarter of a mile maybe from the center of the little town. And I think they occupied that new house in '93. The house that my grandparents had lived in was a log house, but it had been clapboarded over. You wouldn't know it was a log house to see it from the road. But they moved from there to the big house that had just been built. And that happened because because my mother's grandparents, her mother's parents, the McClures, McClure, I believe, well, I won't try to remember where he came. He came from the east here. I think it was Rochester, but I'm not sure. He came from the east and he settled there in this region I'm speaking of, Silver Lake, in the region of Silver Lake. And people weren't buying land in large quantities because land was so cheap that they, well anyway, other people weren't buying land, and land was still very cheap in those days. And McClure, though, bought 1,000 acres. It was only a matter of a few dollars an acre, I suppose. And he just bought the land and kept it. And then when he got old, maybe he was thinking about dying. I don't know about that. But anyway, he, well, the time had come when he had to distribute the land because he was getting old. So he distributed the land between his 4 children. That was 2 girls and 2 boys. And he, each piece of land, each 250 acres, became very valuable in not too long a time. And I don't know about how that land became distributed later on, but I do know that the daughter oh, wait a minute, the granddaughter of one of McClure's children Yeah, that's what it had to be. The granddaughter of one of McClure's children somehow or other, more land I think was passed on to her than to any other one that I know anything about. And I really don't know much about any of them, but it just happened so. It isn't that she worked for it particularly, it's that that's just the way it went. The two boys, one was a doctor and the other was a lawyer in New York City. And they apparently, I don't know, they must not have hung on to their money. And I know that the doctor didn't. He wasn't the kind that hangs on to money, unfortunately. And